Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back talking about Australian Survivor, where I'm going to be doing my cast assessment for the upcoming season, Titans versus Rebels, where obviously through this video I'll talk through every member of the cast, talking about my opinions on them based on the preseason videos and bios that we got, and then at the end I'll pick my winner pick for the season. Before we get to that, I do want to talk about my general thoughts on the Titans versus Rebels theme, which is really just more of what you would expect from Australian Survivor. Obviously, this is essentially a redo of Champions versus Contenders, where the Titans very much just feel like a glorified Champions tribe, while the Rebels aren't necessarily one for one with the Contenders, but are, again, essentially the same thing. Again, very similar to this like David versus Goliath sort of dynamic that, again, we've seen many times in Survivor, though, like, at the end of the day, it is a pretty effective one. I will say, though, that Titans versus Rebels does feel weird in the sense that, like, are these even two directly opposed groupings? Where I think this matchup in particular feels a bit random, though obviously it's just a random theme that they're going to create. And really, like, at the end of the day, a lot of these people don't really even make sense for what tribes they're on. Also, it really just doesn't matter, really. It's really just a thing they use for marketing, to where I don't feel like there's really much to really gauge from these tribe delineations. But talk generally about the cast as well. I mean, this is a interesting cast here in the sense that it does feel like a very normal cast. I mean, Australian Survivor is obviously very much relied on returning players and these pseudo celebrities coming into the season, where this season really has very few of that. It very much feels just like a normal cast of Survivor, which is mind-blowing for Australian Survivor. Whereas this is the first all newbie season since Brains versus Brawn, and there's only been 3 seasons beforehand that don't have any semblance of returning player on it. So again, this does feel interesting here. Now, I do know that based on what the executive producer was talking about at the time of Heroes versus Villains, they were talking about how they wanted to do all newbie seasons to kind of build up their all-star casting pool before they do another all-star season. And again, it definitely feels like that's their approach here. But I will say through that, I feel like this cast here does feel largely normal. I mean, while there are people here and there that do feel like they're going to be pretty good TV, I do feel like as a whole, like, I don't know how much this cast is really going to stand out. But again, obviously we'll have to wait for the actual show to see that. But either way, with that, let's get into the actual cast assessments while we're running through each player in alphabetical order of first name, starting it off with Eileen. And Eileen is someone that I do really like coming out of watching her video and learning about her, the fact that she is this massive super fan of the show, to where I very much want Eileen to do well, and I do think there is serious potential here. I mean, really, for me, the person that I would correlate her with the most in terms of her overall potential is someone like a Peta, where I think she is someone that, again, it's not out of the realm of possibility of seeing Eileen go out relatively early. I can see her being a boot in the pre-swap phase of the game, though if she does make it deep into the game, I think she could be a very serious threat. So I could definitely see her pulling off some moves later in the game and gaining enough respect to eventually win a jury vote. But really, at the end of the day, I do feel like she is a pretty high variance player. I don't really feel like she's someone that I feel super guaranteed in making it deep into the game, and because that does make me hesitant to pick her as a winner pick, though she is someone that I do very much like, and I do really want her to do well. Next up, moving on to Alex, and Alex straight up is probably one of the people that I have not as much of a read on here. I mean, he seemed largely just fine, largely affable. I'm sure he'll be a likable presence. I mean, he talks a lot about playing the game for his mother who has breast cancer, and it seems like a person that could be a well-rounded player, but I really just didn't get much from him, from his bio and video, to where, again, he just seems like a largely affable presence. He's not someone that I'm particularly looking at, someone that is going to make it to the very end of the game, though, especially on a game like Australian Survivor, where I think if he does make it towards the end of the game, he'll be someone like a Matt from last season, who didn't have the largest win equity in the world. But I think more than likely, I kind of see him being like an early to mid-merge boot, and someone that is liked, and someone that is looked at as a threat, and eventually taken out along the way. But really, I do feel like he could potentially be a dark horse candidate, but not someone I'm looking at too highly as of right now. Next up, moving on to Caroline, who is the first person we're talking about from the Titans tribe. She is on the older side of things. She's one of the older people on this cast. I do feel like that's something that obviously is going to be a disadvantage coming into a show like Australian Survivor, which is very much focused around physical strength, where, again, she's someone that is primed to be a relatively early boot, though if she's not an early boot, she's probably someone that's primed to make it very deep. Now, normally I would completely dismiss Caroline, though it does seem like she is a big fan of the show and does talk about wanting to make big moves, and again, if she's able to make it deep into the game, I do feel like there's a chance she is able to play a pretty respectable game there. Though, at the end of the day, I just don't know if she's even going to get to that point. Though, really, again, I just feel like she's another high variance player. One that I do hope does well, though I just don't know if she really will. Next up, moving on to Charles, who is another one of the bigger fans on this cast. He obviously feels like someone in this like kind of like Stephen Fishback-y sort of archetype of this like intellectual in his like early 30s, and he's someone that I could definitely see doing well. Though I feel like he's someone that I would probably have more faith in Survivor US than Australian Survivor, where Australian Survivor, again, it's a show that does focus a lot more on physical strength, and through that, I do feel like Charles is probably a bit more high variance on a show like this, to where I could see a world where he's left on the outs, kind of similar to what happened to like Ben from last season, where he's looked at as a bit shifty early on, and also isn't like helping the tribe in challenges, to where, again, I do think there's a little bit of high variance with Charles here, and obviously he's someone that just looks smart from the way he looks, to where I would not be shocked if he's pegged as a threat because of that, to where, yeah, I think there's definitely paths for him to be a relatively early boot, though he's someone that I am also somewhat high on, but again, not enough to be a winner candidate here. Next up, moving on to Eden, who is kind of a strange titan here. I mean, he's someone that manages cinemas, I guess. I guess that's enough to be a titan, but he is someone that I do think has potential here. I mean, like, to be fair, I mean, he's pretty much in the same ballpark as someone like a Charles, and the fact that he is a massive super fan of the show, with him making plenty of references during his intro video, though I do think he's like a slightly different casting archetype than Charles, where Charles, again, comes off as more of like a Stephen Fishback, though I feel like Eden comes off kind of more goofy in a way, which could probably help him in the long term. I do feel like there is like kind of a separate distinction between the two, where I feel like I would look at Charles as someone that would be more inherently threatening, which again, I think could play to Eden's favor here. But again, I could definitely see Eden having this perception of being like one of the weaker players on the tribe. Like, in a way, he kind of reminds you of someone like a Sam from Champions versus Contenders, and maybe that being the way that he's perceived, which, to be fair, I mean, Sam did have a somewhat deep run, again, at least made the merge, wasn't really in danger throughout the pre-merge, so I mean, at least that's something to where, and maybe Eden can do that, but then also at least be a fan and maybe play really big coming into the merge, and again, potentially have a deep run. I do think Eden is, again, someone that I would very much like to do well. I do think there is a lot of potential in him doing well, but another one that, like Charles, I do feel like maybe a little bit high variance enough to where I didn't move him on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Ferris, and Ferris is kind of all over the place in the sense that it feels like we're getting a lot of Ferris in the preseason. I mean, he got one of the first promos to be released, comparing him to George, of all people, while also him just coming off as one of the bigger personalities of the cast. And straight up, I do feel like Ferris has a lot of longevity here. I'll be mind blown if Ferris is not a massive character on this season, someone that makes a very deep run. I would expect Ferris to have probably one of the higher confessional counts of the season by the end. The question is, can he win? And to be honest, I think he can. I mean, like, straight up with Australian Survivor, obviously I do very much favor women typically, where Australian Survivor is typically a show where once you get to the merge, a lot of the bigger alpha guys get taken out all in a row, where usually the top contenders by the end or some of the more well-rounded women, and obviously that doesn't really fit Ferris, but I do think Ferris, of all the guys on this cast, is probably the person I have the most faith in. I do feel like Ferris actually came off pretty well in his video, to where I was actually kind of surprised, because again, his initial package was a lot of him comparing himself to George, but then you watch his extended video and like seems kind of normal. Like, he seems like a person that I could see really gelling on his tribe and having a lot of social connections, and someone that does seem very attuned to the game, while also being someone that is pretty physical seemingly, to where, again, like, I feel like Ferris has a lot of potential to be a very well-rounded player. And like, normally I would have Ferris as a potential winner pick here, though again, if I'm going to limit it to 4 people, which I typically do, I do feel like Ferris just barely misses out on my list of winner candidates, but he's still someone that I do feel pretty good about, to where he just barely ended up missing the cut. But then we're moving on to Frankie, who until very recently is one of the people that I knew probably the least about coming into this season. I really did not get much from her before watching her video and reading her bio, but after that, I feel like Frankie is one of the people I'm coming out of this the highest on, where Frankie again fits into the typical mold of someone that I would expect to do very well on Australian Survivor, of someone that seems to be a pretty well-rounded player, someone that is physical enough enough to not be targeted early on, but also not enough to be a massive threat early on in the merge. Someone that seems to be very social. I mean, she is a salon owner, and through working at salon, you would think you would need a lot of social skills. I mean, we saw this with someone like a Jam Jam in Forever US, where I could see Frankie being very good socially. Now, I do think strategically is probably where I'm a little bit more hazy, but I do feel like Frankie is someone that I am looking at as a potentially very well-rounded player and someone that I do feel pretty high on at this point, to where, again, I am moving her on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to Garrick. And Garrick is kind of a weird player here in the sense that he is the oldest person on this cast, and he is also on the Rebels tribe, despite him being a loss prevention officer, which I don't get how that's very rebel-y. That feels like the opposite of being a rebel, but either way, I mean, like, Garrick does not scream out to me as someone that's going to make it too deep into the game. I do feel like Garrick feels like someone that is going to be booted relatively early on, though again, another one that if he does make it deep into the game, he probably is in it for the long haul. I could definitely see him making Final Tribal. However, I don't know if Garrick has the game ability to potentially win the game. I don't really get the sense that Garrick is someone that is super attuned to the strategy of the game, to where, again, I don't really know how much faith I really have in him strategically, but again, is another high variance player, but someone at the end of the day I don't feel too good about. Next up, moving on to Jaden. And Jaden is someone that probably comes into the season feeling like he's the most out of his depth. I really don't get the sense that Jaden knows much about the game. He clearly comes off as someone that isn't really a fan, and through that is someone that I expect to be out of his depth strategically, though he's also someone that I am expecting to make a deep run, though. He just feels like the type of person that is going to easily make the merge on this season. I don't feel like he should have much trouble unless he's taken out as a pretty expendable number, where I think there's like kind of two paths for me in how he plays the game. If he plays in a more aggressive sort of light, I could see him being like someone like a Big D in Brains vs. Brawn, of someone that is well ingrained in the game but is kind of like stumbling through the game, making some really rash decisions. Or I could see him being a more passive player, and through that being someone like a Gerald, which I think that's probably the more likely outcome there, to where I'm not really expecting much from Jaden, though I do expect him to make it pretty deep. Next, I'm moving on to Jessica. Jessica is someone that, just coming into seeing her archetype wise, I was very much expecting Jessica to be a top contender for me until I read her bio, to where it becomes very clear through reading her bio that I don't think she's long for this game. I mean, she's obviously someone that is very intelligent, but does feel very cold. Like, I can definitely see a world where she comes off similar to someone like an Emily from Survivor 45, though at the end of the day, again, Emily did have that redemption arc to where maybe Jessica can have the same. But again, the fact that Jessica is joking about how unempathetic she is in her bio, it's not a particularly good look, to where I do very much feel like she's going to struggle socially. Now, again, I really do hope that we do get a lot of Jessica. I feel like she's someone that could be a very interesting player if she were to make it deep, though she's someone that I don't feel too great about at this point. So again, I'm not picking her here. Next up, moving on to Kelly. And Kelly is probably the biggest character that we've seen coming into this season. I mean, her energy that she brings in her extended video and also even her shorter video, it really screams out she's going to be a massive character on the show. The question is, for how long? As, I mean, Kelly is someone that I think is prime to be first or second boot of this season. I think she's someone that archetype-wise just feels perfectly set to be one of the first boots. Also, considering how much focus she's getting in the preseason, it would not shock me if she is just outright the first boot. It does feel like first boots typically do get some focus preseason, to where, again, I would not be shocked if she's the first person out. I also would not be shocked if she's like losing finalists, to where obviously that would be the more fun route. I mean, she does obviously seem like a really fun character, to where it would be great if she did make it far, though I'm not expecting her to be someone that has any real chance at winning this game, though those should be a lot of fun despite that. Next up, moving on to Kirby. And Kirby is someone that, like, just looking at the cast, I actually expected Kirby to be my winner pick. I mean, she's someone that is very athletic. She obviously was a former professional athlete. She seems like the type of person that would do well socially and maybe could pick up on the game, though after reading her bio and her video, I don't feel as great about her. I mean, she does feel like someone that seems a little bit out of her depth. I don't know how much she knows about the game strategically. I also feel like socially, she's probably going to be someone that is very close to her one specific group, though I don't know if she's going to branch out beyond that. Like, in many ways, the more I learned about Kirby, the more I kind of compared her to someone like a Moana from Champions and Contenders and All-Stars. I kind of see that sort of route for Kirby. Maybe not even then as strategically as Moana ended up playing the game, but at least someone that, again, like, I do think there's a world where Kirby is well ingrained drained early on and is in danger, but I don't know if she's really going to be able to be that dynamic of a player in the grand scheme of things, to where I'm not really expecting Kirby to win the game, though I do expect her to make a somewhat deep run. I'll be surprised if she's not at the merge, but someone that, again, I just feel like is not particularly likely to win. Next up, moving on to Kitty, who is slightly on the older side of things, though realistically, I don't think it's really going to matter much, considering she's obviously extremely fit and seems like someone that could hold their own against most people in this cast, to where I do think she's someone that is probably going to have a deep run here. As really, I mean, unless she really gets stigmatized due to her age, I do not expect her to be an early boot on this season, though I think she's another one of these for me, to where I do struggle with knowing where she's going to be strategically, where she admits herself that she is not the most strategic thinker in the world, to where I do feel like that could be an issue long term, though I feel like she's someone that should be pretty good short term, to where I expect her to have a deep run here. And again, if she's able to pick up the game towards the end of the game, I could see her becoming a major threat, though I don't know how much confidence I have in that actually happening, to where again, I didn't really move her on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to Mark, who is a former diplomat. And Mark is someone that I'm largely conflicted on. I do feel like initially what I thought he was going to be coming into this was kind of the second coming of Michael from last season, and being this kind of super serious person that probably plays the game a bit hard, though he actually had a much more bubbly personality in his video than I was expecting, though at the same time, I still can't scratch off this notion that I do feel he still does come off very politician-y, in the fact that he definitely does feel like he's very much a people pleaser and does feel disingenuous because of that. And I don't know how that's really gonna work on this season, but he is someone that I do think has some potential to him. I would not completely write him out, though I am largely conflicted on how his run's actually going to go, to where I wasn't feeling super confident to make him a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Nathan, and I know a lot of people are comparing Nathan to like David, and I can kind of see it. I mean, like, I think in a way he kind of feels like a mix of like David and Mark Wales, and like straight up, I mean, like Nathan is pretty much just locked in for merge. Like, I'll be pretty mind blown if he doesn't at least make it to the very end of the pre-merge, to where I see no reason why you would get rid of this guy early. The problems do come from the fact that, again, I don't know how knowledgeable he is about the game. I don't know how strategic he is. I know he talked about how his mom was a Survivor fan, but I don't know if that really translated to him. And even then, I mean, he's just such a big alpha guy, to where I would be shocked if he doesn't get picked off early on the merge. Though, obviously, to be fair, again, we saw in Blood vs. Water where the meta became that they recognized that would be the case, and through that, all the big guys stuck together. And again, maybe that'll happen again this season. Hopefully not. But if that is the case, then maybe Nathan would have more legs there. But even then, I do feel like Nathan comes off as one of the more alpha presences on this cast, so where I would be pretty shocked if he's able to make it to the very end of the game. So because of that, I don't feel that great about him. But I do feel like he's someone that if he were to make it to the end, I feel like he's someone that is pretty likely to win, though again, just feel like it's going to be a tough road getting there. Next up, moving on to Peta. And Peta is someone that, again, fits perfectly into the archetype of player that I am expecting to do well on this sort of season. Again, someone that seems physical enough to where she's not going to be an early boot. Someone that seems to be decent socially. She'd have a somewhat bubbly personality. She also has a very diverse background of her coming from like a lot of different places, her seeming to have a lot of different interests, her seeming to be pretty athletic, where we do get these shots of her kickboxing. She's a bar manager, and again, through working at a bar, you would think she would have a lot of social skills, having to meet a lot of different people. And the best of it all, she's also a massive Survivor super fan. So again, I feel like there is a lot to like here from Peta. I do feel like, again, like she seems like someone that could be a very well-rounded player, and while I do feel like maybe still could be a little bit high variance to a degree, I do feel like Peta is someone that I feel confident enough to move her on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to Raymond, and Raymond is someone that, looking at his picture, I expected him to be super young. I expected him to be like the youngest person on this cast. Turns out he's 27, which, I mean, to be fair, is still on the younger side of things for this cast, but still, I very much expect him to be much younger than that. But I do feel like coming out of his bio and video, he seems largely affable. I mean, he seems like someone that I do think can do very well in the game. He does work in retail, and through that, I would assume would have pretty decent social skills. He seems like someone that could pick up the game pretty well. I believe he is a fan of the show, though not like a massive super fan, to where I believe he said he got caught up with it during COVID, but still, like someone that I could see doing well here. I do think a red flag for me is the fact that he talks himself about how he's a bit too trusting, and I do feel like there is a question mark for me on whether or not he has this like killer instinct that he would potentially need to win the game, especially because I feel like just naturally he's not really the type of person that would be very well respected by a jury. Like in a way I kind of get like Baden-ish vibes from him, to where I could definitely see him getting to the end and just not getting any jury votes. But I do think there is potential there with Raymond, to where, again, of the men, I'm definitely kind of high on Raymond here, though still not someone I'm picking as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to Rihanna, who is a person that exists. Like, Rihanna seems fine. I mean, she seems like someone that should do relatively well. Again, I feel like she seems physical enough to where she should make it somewhat deep into the game. I feel like she screams out as someone that would be like a late pre-merge boot, though. Also someone that would probably be pretty invisible in the show. I think she kind of fits in line with someone like a Casey from Championship Contenders 2, of just someone that, again, like I don't really feel like she's screaming out as someone that's going to be a big presence in the game. The one that doesn't seem like a terrible player either. I mean, she just seems kind of fine, to where I think if she gave me a bit more personality, I probably would have had her as a potential winner pick, though again, as is, I just don't feel like I really got much from her at all, to where through that I didn't end up moving her on. And a similar thing for the next person, that person is Sarah. And Sarah also, I don't feel like I got much from. I mean, she seemed fine also. I mean, she seems largely likable. I mean, she seems to be pretty fit, being a former cheerleader, now being a firefighter, to where you would think that she would have a pretty deep run in the game for her. The question is, does she have any real strategic ability? And I don't know. I mean, I think in many ways she kind of reminds me of someone like a Rach from Survivor UK, who I thought had a lot of potential there, though it didn't really work out. And I do feel like Sarah could be in that mold of someone that maybe gets taken out relatively early, especially considering like she is on the younger side of things, though again, if she does make it far, which I am more so thinking is the more likely option, I still think then, I don't know if she has the killer instinct to really navigate all the way to the end of the game, but I think she is someone that, again, at least has potential. If she were to be able to pick up the game, make some moves towards the end, I think she is someone that could garner the respect to win the game. But as of right now, I don't really see that strategic ability being there. Kind of see her as being this like blindly loyal player that probably has a deep run, but not someone that's really going to be that integral to how the game plays out. So again, not moving her on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Scott. And Scott is someone that I very much want to do well. I feel like Scott is someone that does come off very likable to me. However, Scott just seems kind of primed to be looked at as a relatively weak person from his tribe, and through that be targeted early on, to where even he himself talks about him being a potential physical liability, to where, again, if he is recognizing that, I feel like other people are going to as well. Now, again, I think there is potential with Scott. I mean, he is a big Survivor fan, and that's something that, again, is good to see. And I could definitely see him bonding with a lot of the other super fans that are on his tribe, which again, there are a decent chunk, I mean, more than normal, but I just don't know if he's someone that is going to really gel on his tribe, to where I do feel like at the end of the day, I do expect him to be an early boot. But again, I really do hope he does well. And if he does make it far, again, there is potential there for sure, but I am more so expecting him to be a relatively early boot here. Next up, moving on to Tobias. And Tobias is probably one of the more alpha people on his tribe here. I mean, he is on the older side of things, being 41, but does seem extremely physical, and someone that, again, I do think at the end of the day is probably going to try to lead his tribe. Like, in a way, he kind of reminds me of someone like a Matt Rogers to a degree, though probably a bit more cocky than Matt Rogers, at least inherently, where, again, his confidence very much screamed out through his videos, to where, again, I'm a bit mixed on Tobias, where, I mean, like, overall, I do feel like Tobias feels like he's going to have longevity here, though he also screams out as someone that's going to have a big fall around the time of the merge, to where I would not be shocked if he takes control of his original tribe and if he's really leading things coming into the merge, though, again, it just feels like he's primed for a blindside there, and even if he isn't, man, he seems like someone that could even be primed for a blindside earlier on with him being really domineering. Now, again, if I'm wrong in the fact that he's not as domineering as I'm expecting him to be, then maybe there's a shot he could be someone like a Baden from Brains vs. Brawn, just not as screwed over as him, where maybe he can make it deep at that point, but I don't really see it. I don't feel like Tobias is someone that I'm particularly high on here. Next up, we're moving on to another one of the more promoted figures of this cast, and that person is Valeria. And Valeria was the first person to get a promo from this season, and just in general, very much comes off as probably someone that they're expecting to be a major character here. Like Ferris, I do feel like she's someone that I would expect to make a somewhat deep run on this season. I'd be surprised if she doesn't. In many ways, she kind of does remind me of Liz to a degree, and the fact that she does seem to have this like kind of more cold demeanor, though also seems to be a potentially well-rounded player. I mean, again, who really knows strategically, but she's someone that, again, I could see being pretty social and seems to be physical enough. I mean, also owns a dancing company. So to where, again, you would think you would have to be in shape for that. To where I'm expecting Valeria to do pretty well here. Now, straight up, I would probably be higher on a couple other people if it wasn't for her focus in the preseason. Where, again, like, I do expect her to do extremely well based on her promotion in the preseason, to where, well, naturally, she's probably not the person I'm the highest on of this cast. I do feel like she is someone I feel confident enough in to move her on as a potential winner pick. Next up, moving on to another of the more promoted people coming in this season. That person is Viola, who I believe is the youngest person of this cast, surprisingly, to where I would not have expected that just based on what we've seen of her. But she is another one here that does seem to come off as a pretty well-rounded player. I mean, she is extremely physical, someone that is probably one of the most physical people on this cast. And through that, again, I would expect to have a pretty easy ride to the merge. To where she also seems to have a pretty fun personality, someone that I am expecting to just in general do very well on this season. Again, another really well-rounded player, and one that, if she is super in tune to the game, again, I could definitely see Viola coming out of this as one of the most likely winners on the board. And considering, again, how much promotion she's getting in the preseason, I would expect her to have a somewhat deep run here, or at least be a major figure within the season. To where, again, she's another one of these people that I do have some of the most confidence in coming out of this preseason, to where, again, she's another one I'm moving on as a potential winner pick. Then finally, the last person from this cast we gotta talk about is Winna. Where's Winna gonna be my winner pick? No, he's not. But Winna does seem like an interesting figure on this cast. I mean, he is one of the few, again, pseudo celebrities here. I mean, while we had the likes of Nathan and Kirby, who are former athletes, we had the likes of like Kitty and Jaden, who I believe have somewhat big social media followings. Winna does seem like the biggest quote unquote celebrity on the board. I mean, he seems to have the biggest social media following. He also very much feels like a Renaissance man, of someone that just has so much going on, where he's a TikToker, he is a competitive eater, he seems like a social guy, to where, again, I am expecting Winna to probably do well on this season. However, I am not expecting him to win. I do feel like Winna seems like someone that doesn't really know the game particularly well, definitely comes off as someone that was recruited for the show, and someone that is one of the least knowledgeable players on the board here, to where I do feel like while he definitely has longevity in him, again, I would be pretty surprised to not see him at least make it like deep into the pre-merge. I feel like he's also, again, just someone that I am not expecting to end up having the killer instinct necessary to really navigate through the game in an impressive way, to where, I mean, straight up, again, he could pick up on the game and could potentially do very well, but at the end of the day, I don't feel like the potential is enough for me to pick him as a winner pick here. But there we go, and with that, that is the entire cast of the season. Now let's get into who I'm going to pick as my winner pick, where, again, the top four here are all women, all like kind of similar women archetype-wise, of women that I'm expecting to be these very well-rounded players. So where here we do have Frankie, Peta, Valeria, and Viola. And the first of these that I'm going to cut here is going to be Valeria. I do feel like Valeria, while again, I do think she's getting a lot of focus in the preseason, that does scream out as someone that's going to get a long longevity here. I also probably feel the least confident in her social and strategic abilities from the rest of this final four. So really, she was someone that was bolstered up due to her prominence in the preseason. Though again, I think there is serious potential there. I could definitely see this like Liz-like trajectory for her, but as of right now, I don't feel like I'm confident enough to pick her as my winner pick. Now, following that, next person I'm going to cut here is Viola, who again, similar thing of, again, she was one that definitely got propped up for me because she was so prominent in the preseason. Though to be fair, I don't feel like the winner has been that focused on in the preseason for the last few seasons. I mean, Liz, I don't feel like got that big of focus on in the preseason of Heroes vs. Villains. I don't believe Haley got that big of a focus in Brains vs. Brawn. Now, Mark obviously is a separate situation considering he was a big returning player, but anyway, I feel like the winner's not always gotten this major focus early on, though I do think it does scream out his longevity for Viola here, but still, I feel like Viola, the thing that's deterring me from picking her here is simply her age. Again, she is on the younger side of things, and considering her lessened life experience, I just don't feel as confident in picking her here, though again, I do think there's a lot of potential there, and there is some serious upsides for her, but again, I feel like for me that was just enough for me to not pick her here. And with that, we get to our final two of Frankie and Peta, who both of which are not super focused on the preseason. I mean, neither of them are these like major figures that are getting these big promos, which again might not be a good sign for all I know, but I do feel like these are the two that kind of scream out to me as the most well-rounded players of the bunch, the ones that seem to be physical enough to where they're not going to be booted early, people that have backgrounds that seem like that would lead to them having pretty good social skills while also potentially being very good strategically, though it is that strategic aspect of it that is going to lead to my winner pick here. So because that my winner pick for this season is Peta. Simply because, again, Peta is a super fan of the show. I think in most other aspects, again, I do look at her and Frankie pretty similarly, but I do think it is the fact that Peta is such an open super fan of the show, but is also talking about how she's not going to talk about how she's a super fan of the show while on the show, to where it does make me feel like she's more in tune to the game. It does make me feel like she knows the game pretty well and is going to play the game mostly optimally. Now, I do think there is a minor red flag in the fact that Peta does talk about how big of a fan of the show she is, but then proceeds to follow that up by saying her favorite player is Shay from Blood vs. Water. Though I think an interesting thing is that she doesn't necessarily say that she's going to play like Shay, but she does talk about how she wants to work with people like Shay. And I feel like that is an interesting aspect of her preseason that, again, makes me feel like she's at least more aware. Because, again, like someone like Shay is great to work with. Someone that is pretty loyal in the game. Someone that's going to be this physical threat and potentially be a shield for you. So again, I definitely see a lot of upside for Peta. So again, Frankie, someone that I also feel pretty good about as well, though I just don't know if I have as much confidence in her strategically. So again, that made Peta the pretty easy pick for me here. But there we go. I mean, that is my cast assessment for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. Now, obviously, like the last few seasons, I'll be doing the same thing. I will be doing a mid-season power ranking for this season around the time of the merge, or really with Australian Survivor, it typically just happens exactly at the halfway point, considering we know it's 24 episodes, so 12 episodes in, I'll do my mid-season power ranking there. And at the end of the season, I'll obviously do a big season review along with a player ranking, so stay tuned for all of that. And in general, if you want to keep up with my thoughts on the season as we're going along, you can obviously follow me at twitch.tv/TheMarine where I will be talking about these things twice a week, every Wednesday and Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern time, to where again, you can hear my opinions as the season goes along. But now beyond that, I do have some pretty big videos coming up in the near future. Really, it's been a slow start to 2024, with me kind of catching up with videos that were meant to come out at the end of last year, though this is really where I feel like I'm kickstarting the start of the year here, where again, I got my penultimate juror ranking for Survivor coming up. We got my Survivor All-Star retrospective, I'm assuming cast assessment for Survivor 46, my big brother player ranking of every single player. Again, there's a lot there coming up in the near future, so stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.